Story 1. I never expected my wedding day to turn into something that could go viral on social media, but here we are. Let me tell you how my perfect day almost got ruined by the most entitled person I've ever encountered. After 2 years of planning, saving every penny, and dreaming about this moment, the big day had finally arrived. My fiancée and I had chosen this beautiful rustic venue with wooden beams and twinkling lights hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't extravagant, but it was exactly what we wanted, something intimate and meaningful. I grew up in a small town where most people got married right after high school, but I had different plans. I moved to the city for college, worked hard to establish my career, and wasn't in any rush to settle down. Then I met my partner at a friend's housewarming party. We connected instantly over our shared love of old movies and terrible dad jokes. 3 years later, he proposed during a weekend trip to the mountains. We'd spent months meticulously planning every detail of our wedding. The venue was the first thing we booked, a converted barn that had been renovated into an event space. It was perfect, with its stone fireplace and views of rolling hills through the large windows. We had to book it a year in advance because it was so popular. So there I was, in the bridal suite with my 2 best friends helping to adjust my veil. My heart was racing with excitement. Through the door, I could hear our favorite songs playing as guests were being seated. In just 15 minutes, I would walk down the aisle to marry the love of my life. That's when we heard the commotion. At first, I thought maybe someone had dropped something in the main hall. But then the voices got louder. My maid of honor peeked out the door and turned back with a confused look on her face. Maid of honor? There's some lady out there yelling at the venue coordinator. I wasn't too concerned initially. The venue coordinator, a woman in her 50s who had handled hundreds of weddings, seemed more than capable of dealing with whatever issue had arisen. But then the shouting got louder. Unknown woman, what do you mean there's a wedding here today? This venue is booked for my son's birthday party. I felt my stomach drop. What was happening? My maid of honor and I exchanged worried glances. I decided to peek out myself, still in my wedding dress, careful not to be seen by my soon-to-be husband or the guests. What I saw made my jaw drop. A woman in her 40s with a blonde bob haircut was standing in the middle of the entrance hall, hands on her hips, berating the venue coordinator. Beside her was a young boy who looked about 8 years old, clearly uncomfortable with his mother's behavior. The woman, "This is ridiculous. I've been planning this party for months. My son only turns 8 once in his life." Venue coordinator, "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we have no record of your booking. We have this wedding scheduled for today, and they booked over a year ago." The woman, "I don't care when they booked it. Weddings happen all the time. This is a special day for my son." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman was actually trying to argue that her son's birthday party should take precedence over my wedding. My hands started shaking as I watched her pull out her phone. The woman, "See? I have it right here. I inquired about this date 6 months ago." The venue coordinator looked at the phone and shook her head. Venue coordinator, "Ma'am, this is just an email asking about availability. You never confirmed the booking or paid the deposit." The woman, "Well, I meant to. And now we're here with all our party supplies, and my son is expecting his party. You need to fix this." By this point, several guests had wandered into the entrance hall, curious about the commotion. My father, who had been waiting to walk me down the aisle, came to the bridal suite door looking concerned. "Dad, what's going on out there?" Before I could answer, we heard gasps from the entrance hall. I peeked out again to see the woman actually pushing past the venue coordinator, dragging several shopping bags with her. The woman, "Fine. If you won't help us, we'll just have to share the space. It's big enough." I watched in horror as she started pulling out birthday decorations, balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Happy 8th birthday." The venue coordinator was on her phone, presumably calling security, while trying to stop the woman from hanging decorations. That's when I decided I needed to intervene. This was my wedding day, and I wasn't about to let this entitled woman ruin it. I stepped out of the bridal suite, my wedding dress swishing around me. Me, Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? The woman turned and looked me up and down, not a hint of embarrassment on her face. The woman, oh, you must be the bride. Look, I'm sorry, but there's been a mix-up. We need to have my son's birthday party here today. Surely you can understand how important this is for a child? Me, I understand that birthdays are important, but we booked this venue a year ago. We've paid in full. We have 100 guests waiting for the ceremony to begin. I'm sorry, but you need to leave. The woman, leave? Leave? Do you know how disappointed my son will be? He's been looking forward to this for months. You can get married anywhere, anytime. Her son was standing off to the side, looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. I felt terrible for him, but this wasn't our problem to solve. The venue security guard had arrived by this point and was standing beside the coordinator. Security guard, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your things and leave. This is a private event. The woman, you can't make me leave. I have rights. I'll sue this entire establishment. That's when things got even more bizarre. The front doors swung open, and a man hurried in, looking frazzled and angry. He spotted the woman, and his face turned red. Man, Christine, what the hell are you doing? The woman, apparently named Christine, suddenly looked less confident. Christine, John, thank goodness you're here. They're trying to kick us out. They double-booked our son's party. The man John looked around at the obvious wedding setup, then at me in my wedding dress, then back at his wife with an expression that can only be described as exhausted anger. John, there was no booking. Christine, I told you this morning when you were packing up all this stuff. You only asked about this place. You never actually booked it. Christine, but I was going to, and they should have held the date for us. John turned to me, the venue coordinator, and the growing crowd of onlookers. John, I am so sorry. My wife. She does this. She gets these ideas in her head and convinces herself they're reality. He turned back to his wife. John, this is the third time. Christine, the third time you've done something like this. Remember the restaurant last year? And the vacation house the year before that? Christine's face was turning red, but instead of looking embarrassed, she looked furious. Christine, so you're taking their side. What about your son's birthday? Don't you care about making him happy? Their son was now practically hiding behind a decorative plant, clearly mortified. Son, Mom, please. I told you I just wanted pizza and video games at home with my friends. Christine, that's not special enough. You deserve better. You deserve this venue. By this point, my wedding planner had arrived and was trying to herd guests back to their seats while checking her watch nervously. We were now running late for the ceremony. The venue coordinator stepped forward. Venue coordinator, sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to insist you leave immediately or I'll be forced to call the police. Christine, call them. I'm not leaving. This venue was promised to us. John sighed deeply and turned to the coordinator. John, please don't call the police. We'll leave. Christine, pack up your things now. Christine, no, I'm not leaving. My son deserves this. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This grown woman was having a full-on tantrum in the middle of my wedding venue. Guests were staring. The photographer had started taking pictures, which, honestly, I later became grateful for because no one would have believed this story otherwise. John tried to take Christine's arm to lead her out, but she yanked it away and actually ran toward the main hall where my ceremony was supposed to take place. She pushed open the doors, revealing all my seated guests, the decorated aisle, and my very confused groom standing at the altar. Christine, attention everyone. This venue has been double booked. I'm very sorry, but you'll all need to leave. My son's birthday party starts in 30 minutes. There was a moment of stunned silence, then murmurs spread through the crowd. My groom's face was a mixture of confusion and concern as he spotted me standing in the back in my wedding dress. That's when John finally lost his patience. He stormed down the aisle after his wife. John, that's enough. You are embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing our son, and you're ruining these people's wedding. He turned to our guests. John, I am so incredibly sorry for my wife's behavior. There is no double booking. She never actually reserved this venue. We are leaving right now." By this point, the venue security guard had called the police despite the coordinator's hesitation. 2 officers arrived just as John was trying to physically guide Christine out of the hall, with her resisting every step of the way. "Police officer, what seems to be the problem here?" The venue coordinator quickly explained the situation. The officers looked at each other, clearly having dealt with similar situations before. "Police officer, ma'am, you need to leave the premises now. You're trespassing on private property during a scheduled event." "Christine, but my son's birthday." "Police officer, is not happening here today. You can either leave willingly, or we can escort you out." Christine looked around, perhaps finally realizing the scene she had created. There were over 100 people staring at her. Her son was in tears from embarrassment. Her husband looked like he was contemplating divorce papers. "Christine, fine, but I'll be leaving a terrible review for this venue. Your customer service is horrible." The officers escorted Christine, John, and their son out of the building. As they left, I could hear John apologizing profusely to everyone they passed. Once they were gone, the venue coordinator rushed over to me, clearly distressed. "Venue coordinator, I am so sorry this happened. In 20 years of running this venue, I've never experienced anything like this." She promised us an extra hour at the venue at no charge and even offered a partial refund. My wedding planner quickly reorganized the schedule, and after a 15-minute delay to let everyone settle down again, my dad walked me down the aisle. Despite the bizarre start, the ceremony was beautiful. During the reception, the story of the birthday party crasher, as our guests were calling her, became the talk of the evening, with everyone sharing their perspective on what had happened. Later, we found out from the venue staff that Christine had indeed sent an inquiry email 6 months earlier, asking about availability for her son's birthday. The venue had responded with their rates and booking information, but Christine never followed up or paid the deposit. Somehow, in her mind, that inquiry had become a confirmed booking. John had apparently been dealing with similar situations for years. He later sent us a heartfelt apology card with a gift certificate to a nice restaurant, explaining that Christine had some issues with reality that she refused to address. As for our wedding, it turned out perfect despite the drama. Our first dance, the speeches, the food, everything went smoothly after Christine's exit. And now, whenever my husband and I face a challenging situation, we just look at each other and say, "Well, at least there's no entitled mom trying to turn it into a birthday party." Some people just can't accept that the world doesn't revolve around them or their children. I feel bad for that little boy, though. Imagine having to grow up with a mother who causes scenes like that regularly. I hope she eventually got the help she clearly needed. Oh, and the venue gave us our wedding photos for free as an additional apology, including several candid shots of Christine's meltdown, which, I'll admit, have become quite the conversation starter when people visit our home and see our wedding album. Story 2. I've always been close with my sister. Even when we were kids, we had each other's backs. She's 4 years older than me and has always been my protector, my confidant, and my best friend. So naturally, when she had her son 7 years ago, I became the proudest uncle on the planet. My sister is black, and she married a Korean-American man. They met in college, fell in love, and now have the cutest kid you could ever imagine. My nephew is this perfect blend of both his parents. He has his dad's eyes and smile, but his mom's curly hair and dimples. He's smart as a whip too, already reading at a 3rd grade level, even though he's only in 1st grade. I'm white, taking after our dad while my sister took after our mom. That's just how genetics worked out in our family. We never thought much about it growing up, and I certainly never thought it would lead to one of the most infuriating encounters of my life. It happened last Saturday. My sister and her husband were celebrating their anniversary with a weekend getaway, and I volunteered to watch my nephew. We had big plans: video games, pizza, Staying up late watching movies inappropriate for 7-year-olds, okay, just kidding about that last part. But we did watch all the Marvel movies he hadn't seen yet. By Saturday afternoon, we were both in the mood for a treat, so I decided to take him to Scoops, this awesome local ice cream place that makes everything from scratch. They have this chocolate fudge flavor that will make you believe in a higher power. My nephew, being the sophisticated kid that he is, always goes for the mint chocolate chip. It was a beautiful spring day, warm but not hot, with a light breeze, perfect ice cream weather. We walked the 6 blocks from my apartment to Scoops, my nephew chattering excitedly about the new Spider-Man Lego set he was saving up for. He was holding my hand and skipping every few steps, that particular bounce walk that only happy kids can pull off. When we got to Scoops, there was a short line, maybe 5 or 6 people ahead of us. My nephew pressed his face against the glass display, fogging it up as he surveyed all the flavors, even though I knew he'd end up with mint chocolate chip anyway. Me, remember, you can try a sample if you want to branch out. My nephew, no way, uncle, mint chocolate chip is the best. Why would I get anything else? Me, fair point, buddy. Can't argue with ice cream loyalty. We were laughing and discussing the merits of different ice cream flavors when I felt someone staring at us. I glanced to my right and saw a woman, probably in her mid-50s, with that stereotypical haircut that's become synonymous with entitlement. You know, the one blonde with darker roots, cut in an asymmetrical bob that says, "I regularly terrorize retail workers." She was wearing expensive-looking athleisure wear and enough jewelry to open a small boutique. At first, I ignored her. People stare sometimes, especially at my nephew, because he's an objectively adorable kid. But her staring was intense, and it continued for an uncomfortable amount of time. Just as we were about to reach the front of the line, she tapped me on the shoulder. "Woman, excuse me." Her tone wasn't friendly. It was that fake polite voice people use when they're about to say something incredibly rude. Me, yes? "Woman, is that your child?" The question caught me off guard. My nephew, who had been studying the ice cream flavors, turned around to look at her. Me, he's my nephew. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was very, very wrong. "Woman, really? He doesn't look anything like you." Her emphasis on anything made my skin crawl. I could see where this was going, and I wanted to shut it down immediately. Me, that's how genetics works sometimes. We're done talking about this. I turned back toward the counter, placing a protective hand on my nephew's shoulder. He looked confused but not yet alarmed. My nephew, "Uncle, can I get sprinkles too?" Before I could answer, the woman moved to stand beside us, now fully inserting herself into our space. "Woman, I just find it suspicious that a grown man is with a child that clearly doesn't look like him. You said you're his uncle?" Me? Yes, I'm his uncle. His mom is my sister. Please leave us alone. My nephew, sensing the tension, pressed closer to me. The ice cream server behind the counter was watching our interaction with concern. "Woman, I don't believe you. That child is clearly mixed race, and you're white. It doesn't add up." Now I was getting angry. My nephew was looking up at me with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable. Me, my sister is black. Her husband is Korean American. This is their son, my nephew. Now please, step away and mind your own business. Woman, anyone can make up a story. I'm very observant, and something isn't right here. I'm concerned for the child's safety. At this point, several people in the ice cream shop were openly staring at us. An employee who had been wiping down tables moved closer, hovering nearby. My nephew tugged at my sleeve, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. My nephew, "Uncle, what's wrong? Why is that lady being mean?" The woman's eyes narrowed, completely ignoring the fact that my nephew had just called me uncle again. "Woman, sweetie, do you know this man? Are you okay? You can tell me if you're not." My blood was boiling now. She was questioning my nephew directly, trying to suggest I was some kind of predator. My nephew looked confused and scared, clutching my hand tighter. "My nephew, he's my uncle. We're getting ice cream." "Woman, But honey, he doesn't look like your uncle. Does your mommy know you're with him? I'd had enough. I pulled out my phone. Me, I'm calling my sister right now. This is completely inappropriate. Woman, I'm calling the police. And to my absolute shock, she actually did it. Right there in the middle of the ice cream shop, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The server behind the counter motioned to another employee, who disappeared into the back, presumably to get a manager. Woman, yes. Hello? I need to report a suspicious situation at Scoop's Ice Cream on Maple Street. There's a white man with a mixed-race child who doesn't appear to be related to him. I'm concerned the child may be in danger. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My nephew was now clinging to my leg, looking genuinely frightened not of me, but of the situation and this strange, angry woman. Me, ma'am, you need to stop this right now. You're scaring my nephew. Woman, stay where you are. The police are coming. By now, a small crowd had gathered. An older gentleman stepped forward. Older gentleman, lady, leave them alone. The kid called him uncle twice. You're causing a scene over nothing. Woman, you don't know what's happening here. Children get trafficked every day. I'm being vigilant. The shop manager had emerged from the back and approached us cautiously. Manager, is everything okay here? Woman, no. This man has a child that clearly isn't his. I've called the police. Manager, sir, is this your son? Me, he's my nephew. My sister is black. Her husband is Korean American. This woman is harassing us for no reason other than my nephew, and I have different skin tones. The manager looked from me to my terrified nephew, then to the increasingly agitated woman. He seemed to make a decision. Manager, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside if you can't calm down. You're disturbing our customers. Woman, I will not leave this child with a potential kidnapper. I'm staying right here until the police arrive. The situation was escalating beyond belief. My nephew was now on the verge of tears, and I felt helpless. I had kneeled down to comfort him when the woman did something that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. She lunged forward and grabbed my nephew's arm, trying to pull him away from me. Woman, come with me, sweetheart. You'll be safe until the police get here. My nephew let out a terrified scream that will haunt me forever. I immediately pulled him back, shielding him with my body. Me, don't touch him. What is wrong with you? Several people jumped in then. The older gentleman physically stepped between us and the woman. A young couple who had been in line behind us moved to stand beside my nephew and me, forming a protective barrier. The manager firmly gripped the woman's shoulder and pulled her back. Manager, that's enough. You do not put your hands on a child in my store. The woman was now shouting, her face contorted with self-righteous anger. Woman, you're all enabling a kidnapper. That child needs help. My nephew was crying now, his face buried against my shoulder. I was doing my best to comfort him while also keeping an eye on the unhinged woman who had just tried to physically take him from me. The next few minutes were tense. The woman continued ranting, though thankfully she was being kept at a distance by the manager and other customers. My nephew's sobs had subsided to sniffles, and I was desperately trying to think of how to extract us from this nightmare when the police finally arrived. 2 officers walked in, immediately assessing the situation. The woman rushed over to them, pointing dramatically at us. Woman, officers, thank goodness you're here. That man has a child that isn't his. I was trying to protect the boy. One officer stayed with the woman while the other approached us. I could feel my heart racing. Even though I knew I had done absolutely nothing wrong, having a police officer approach you in a situation like this is terrifying. Police officer, sir, can you tell me what's going on? I explained everything as calmly as I could, though I'm sure the strain was evident in my voice. My nephew, still clinging to me, nodded vigorously at appropriate points in my explanation. Police officer, do you have any identification? I carefully shifted my nephew so I could reach my wallet. I showed the officer my ID, then pulled up photos on my phone, pictures of my sister and her family, including several of me with my nephew at various ages. I also pulled up my sister's contact information. Me, you can call my sister right now if you need to verify everything I've told you. The officer looked through the photos, his expression softening slightly. He turned to my nephew. Police officer, hey buddy, is this your uncle? My nephew nodded emphatically. My nephew, yes, he's my mommy's brother. We were getting ice cream, and that lady started being mean. The officer nodded, then went to confer with his partner. I could see them talking to the woman, whose demeanor was rapidly changing from righteous indignation to nervous backpedaling. Woman, well, I was just concerned. You can't be too careful these days. I was trying to do the right thing. Police officer, ma'am, you attempted to physically remove a child from his guardian. That's not doing the right thing. Woman, I was just holding his hand. He looked scared. The older gentleman who had stepped in earlier spoke up. Older gentleman, that's a lie. She grabbed the boy and tried to pull him away. We all saw it. Several other customers nodded in agreement. The woman's face was turning an alarming shade of red. Woman, well, they don't look related. Anyone would have been concerned. Police officer, ma'am, families come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. That doesn't give you the right to harass them or put your hands on a child. What happened next was illuminating. The officer's partner was on his radio, apparently running some information. After a moment, he walked over and said something quietly to the first officer, who raised his eyebrows and gave the woman a hard look. Police officer, ma'am, is your name Karen Johnson? Woman, yes, why? Police officer, Miss Johnson, this is the third time this month you've called in a false report about suspicious activity. We've warned you about this before. The woman, whose name really was Karen, I couldn't make this up, suddenly looked much less confident. Karen, those were legitimate concerns. I'm a vigilant citizen. Police officer, you're interfering with police business and wasting resources. Turn around, please. You're under arrest for filing a false police report, disturbing the peace, and attempted assault of a minor. Karen, what? You can't be serious. I was trying to help. But the officers were indeed serious. As they handcuffed her and read her rights, Karen switched tactics, suddenly becoming tearful and apologetic. Karen, I made a mistake. I was just worried about the child. You can't arrest me for caring too much. Her pleas fell on deaf ears as the officers led her outside to their patrol car. The entire ice cream shop seemed to collectively exhale once she was gone. The manager approached us, looking genuinely distressed. Manager, sir, I am so sorry that happened in our establishment. Your ice cream is on the house today, whatever you both want. My nephew, recovering remarkably quickly now that the threat was gone, perked up at the mention of free ice cream. My nephew, can I get a double scoop? His resilience made me laugh despite everything, breaking the tension that had built up in my chest. Me, absolutely, buddy. Double scoop with all the toppings you want. We ended up sitting in the shop for nearly an hour, enjoying our massive ice cream creations. The other customers and staff were incredibly kind, coming over to check on us and express their outrage at what had happened. My nephew, his face covered in mint chocolate chip and sprinkles, seemed to have bounced back completely, though I knew we'd need to talk about it more later. I learned afterward that Karen had a history of calling the police on people she deemed suspicious, which almost always involved people of color or mixed-race families. This incident finally resulted in actual charges being filed against her. When my sister and her husband returned from their trip, I had to tell them what happened. My sister was furious. My brother-in-law resigned. This wasn't his first encounter with racism directed at his family. My nephew, thankfully, seemed more traumatized by the woman's behavior than by any racial implications, which he was still too young to fully understand. The whole experience was eye-opening for me. As a white man, I'd never had my right to be with my own family member questioned. My sister deals with versions of this all the time, people asking if she's her son's nanny, strangers touching his hair without permission, comments about how exotic he looks. This was just a small taste of what they navigate regularly. The silver lining, if there is one, is that so many people in the ice cream shop stood up for us. They formed a literal human shield around my nephew when he was frightened. They spoke up to the police about what really happened. They showed us that for every entitled Karen in the world, there are good people willing to do the right thing. And my nephew, he still loves ice cream, still loves our uncle-nephew days, and has decided that when he grows up, he wants to be an ice cream maker who gives free ice cream to nice people and none to mean people. I think that's a pretty solid career plan. Story 3. Let me give you some background. I bought my house about 5 years ago after working my butt off at a software company for nearly a decade. The previous owners had installed this gorgeous in-ground pool that takes up about half of the backyard. It wasn't cheap, the house was priced higher because of it, but I figured it was worth the investment. I'd always wanted a pool growing up, and now I finally had one. I'm not exactly swimming in money, pun intended, but I maintain that pool meticulously. Between the chemicals, cleaning equipment, heating costs, and occasional maintenance professionals, I probably spend a couple $1,000s every year just keeping it in good shape. But it's my little slice of paradise, especially during our brutally hot summers. Enter my neighbor, who I'll just call Karen, because that's exactly who she turned out to be. She moved in next door about 2 years ago with her husband and their 3 kids. At first, everything was fine. We exchanged pleasantries over the fence, and I even brought them a housewarming gift, just trying to be neighborly, you know? The trouble started last summer when Karen noticed me swimming. She came to the fence with her kids in tow, all of them wearing swimsuits and carrying towels. Karen, hi there. The kids and I were wondering if we could join you for a swim. It's so hot today. Me, oh, I'm sorry, but I'm actually about to head inside. Maybe another time? I wasn't trying to be rude, but I honestly wasn't comfortable with the idea of neighbors using my pool when I barely knew them. Plus, I had liability concerns. What if one of her kids got hurt? I'd be responsible. Karen seemed disappointed, but didn't push it. At least, not that day. Over the next few weeks, she'd make similar requests, always just wondering if her kids could pop over for a quick swim. Each time, I made up some excuse. Eventually, I had to be more direct. Look, I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable having guests use the pool when I'm not around. And even when I am around, I prefer to keep it private most of the time. Karen, but it's such a waste. You're barely even using it, and my kids love to swim. Don't you think it's a bit selfish to keep such a big pool all to yourself? I understand it might seem that way, but it's my property, and I'm the one paying for its upkeep. Karen, well, we could chip in for chemicals or whatever. My kids deserve to enjoy a nice pool too, you know. That word deserve set off alarm bells in my head. Nobody deserves access to someone else's private property, but I tried to stay polite. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. After that conversation, things got chilly between us. Karen would glare at me when I was outside, and her kids would stand at the fence, watching wistfully whenever I took a dip in the pool. I felt bad for the kids. It wasn't their fault their mother was teaching them that they were entitled to other people's stuff, but I stood my ground. Then came the day that changed everything. I had gone to visit my parents for the weekend, leaving Friday afternoon and planning to return Sunday evening. I pulled into my driveway around 6 p.m. on Sunday, tired from the drive, but looking forward to relaxing at home. As I walked around to the backyard to check on some plants, I heard splashing and laughter. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there was Karen and all 3 of her kids swimming in my pool, with pool toys I'd never seen before floating around them. They had even set up a little picnic area on my patio with a cooler and snacks. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. What the hell is going on here? Karen looked up, not even a hint of shame on her face. Karen, oh, you're back. We're just enjoying the pool. The kids were dying in this heat, and since you were gone for the weekend. Get out. Get out of my pool right now. The kids looked scared and started to climb out, but Karen stayed put, floating on one of her inflatable loungers. Karen, don't be so dramatic. It's not like we broke anything. The pool is just sitting here going to waste when you're not home. Me? This is my property. You are trespassing. How did you even get in here? Karen, your gate latch is pretty simple. Look, the community should be able to share resources like this. It's practically a public good at this point. Me? A public good? Are you kidding me? This is my private property that I pay for. Karen, well, we've actually been using it for a while now whenever you're gone. I'm just evening things out. You have this big pool all to yourself, and my kids don't have anywhere to swim. It's not fair. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time. The thought of them sneaking into my yard repeatedly made my blood boil. Me, get out right now, or I'm calling the police. Karen, go ahead. I'll tell them how you're hoarding a community resource. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I went inside, grabbed my phone, and called the police. While waiting, I took photos of Karen and her kids in my pool, plus all their stuff on my patio. Karen eventually got out of the pool, but refused to leave my property, insisting she had rights because she'd been using the pool for a while now. When the police arrived about 20 minutes later, Karen launched into a speech about how pools should be shared resources and how her kids deserved access to it because it was unfair for one person to have exclusive use of such a large pool. The cops weren't buying it. One officer asked how she got onto the property, and when she admitted to climbing the fence, that sealed the deal. They explained very clearly that she was trespassing on private property and had no right to be there, no matter how many times she'd done it before. Karen, but we've been using it all summer. Doesn't that give us some rights? Police officer, ma'am, that's actually worse. You're admitting to repeated trespassing. They took her information and told her she'd be facing trespassing charges. They also told me I could pursue additional charges for any property damage if I found any. As Karen was escorted off my property, her husband came running over, looking mortified. Apparently, he had no idea what his wife had been doing. The poor guy looked like he wanted to sink into the ground as the officers explained the situation to him. Karen's husband, I am so sorry. I had no idea she was doing this. I thought the kids were going to the community pool across town. Over the next few days, I discovered several things. My water bill had been unusually high the past 2 months. Now I knew why. Some of my pool equipment had been damaged, and the chemical balance in the pool was all wrong, probably because of the extra people using it and not knowing how to maintain it properly. I decided to install a comprehensive security system with cameras covering every angle of my backyard, plus a much more secure lock on the gate. It cost me over $1,000, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. Karen and her husband tried to smooth things over by offering to pay for any damages, but I wasn't interested in reconciliation. The trespassing charges went through, and Karen ended up with a fine and community service. From what I heard through other neighbors, her husband was furious about the whole situation and the legal fees they now had to pay. The best part? About 3 months later, a for sale sign appeared in their front yard. Apparently, the embarrassment of the whole ordeal was too much for them to stay in the neighborhood. Karen couldn't show her face at community events anymore because everyone knew what she'd done. The day they moved out, I celebrated by inviting friends over for a pool party, a proper one, with invited guests who respected boundaries. As we enjoyed the crystal clear water of my private pool, I couldn't help but feel that justice had been served. I may not be willing to share my pool with entitled strangers, but I did learn one thing from this experience. Good fences and security systems make good neighbors.